Good evening, families, and welcome to the Parent and Family Programs webinar series. My name is Heather Deer, and I am the Interim Director of Parent and Family Programs here at William & Mary. I don't want to take time from our wonderful presenter because I know it's going to be a wonderful presentation. So I am just going to turn it over to our presenter, Dr. Kelly Crace. He's our Associate Vice President for Health and Wellness here at William & Mary, and the floor is all yours, Kelly. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Heather, and thanks for the invitation. Any day I get to collaborate with you is a highlight of my day. So thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to spend some time with our lovely parents and families that are a part of our community. And I'm going to jump right into it because part of what often gets talked about around our work around flourishing is being able to kind of see how during orientation, I've met with many parents and during family weekend talking about our work around flourishing and advanced resilience. And part of that is about kind of changing how we think a little bit about resilience, because our generation of young adults often get labeled as being a very fragile or non-resilient generation, which our research doesn't bore that out. It doesn't bear that out. We find that they've had to be resilient to get here. They've had to be resilient to manage some of the absurdities of our world and the absurdities of their life experiences. And with your help and support, they've been able to reach this next level. And what we believe is that with this relentless world of change, a relentless world of pace and uncertainty, we need more advanced levels of resilience. And what can we do to kind of move them into a flourishing culture and into a flourishing state? I'm a psychologist by training, and for the past over 30 years, my research and work has been in trying to really understand what predicts flourishing. And we defined flourishing by a consistent, not a perfect, but a consistent level of productivity, fulfillment, and resilience. We were looking for kind of a deeper level of effectiveness. And what does that look like? So those of you that have had the misfortune of hearing me speak before at orientation, and possibly during family weekend, we often had parents that say, we appreciated the introduction, but can you give us a sneak peek into what you actually do with the students? What do you do in the course? What do you do in the classes? What do you do in the workshops and in the individual one-on-one work? Our Authentic Excellence Initiative is designed to be a program with multiple modalities of learning, whichever speaks to them. Some students like to learn one-on-one. Some like to do it in workshops and seminars. Some like to do it online, through a book or through a course or classes. We really try to take them where they like to learn. But many of our parents and families say, I would like to understand this at a deeper level so that we can be a part of this support. We can be a part of this process with our young adult. So that's what tonight's about. I have to be honest with you though. This short amount of time is a lot to cram into a lot of information in a short amount of time. And so it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to, if you'll allow me about 5 minutes to geek out a little bit and tell you a little bit about why we learned what we learned about flourishing and why the work of flourishing is so hard. I've introduced this before, and so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I want to bring us back up to speed and us be from one baseline level of knowledge as to how we start thinking about this. So with your permission, Heather, I'm going to share screen and bring us up on why the work of flourishing is so hard. And Heather, do you mind letting me know if you're seeing that okay? Is that coming up okay on the screen?
It looks great.
Great, thanks, Heather. So one of the things that we want to work with is I'm going to take you through just real briefly why the work of flourishing is so hard. And then I'm going to let us choose what direction we go in for the rest of the time. We can either take a deeper dive into one of these concepts, or you can get a broad sweep of kind of all the concepts that we focus on. And I'm going to let you give me some feedback as to which you would prefer. So be ready to use the chat or to be ready to use whatever function allows you to communicate with Heather and me as to the best way for us to continue. So why is it so hard? Essentially what we looked at is when we were first doing this research 35 years ago, we were really looking at effectiveness and what was the relationship of values to flourishing. Not values in terms of ethics or morality, but what relationship did it have toward flourishing? And we assumed that it was this kind of direct positive linear correlation. In other words, the more attention you give to your values, The more I focus on what matters to me, the more effective I will be. And it made sense because we thought if you focus on what's important, then you'll be motivated and then you'll act. But this is what we found in our work. It actually looks like this. It's a curvilinear relationship, because what we found out is that when you focus on what matters to you, you actually have conflicting motivations and therefore have conflicting actions. We wanted to better understand this. We wanted to look at this and see why does this happen? And it really came down to what happens in our brain psychologically when something becomes important to us, something or someone. And whenever something matters to us, there's three unavoidable truths that you can't escape. The first is uncertainty. The truth is you never completely control everything that goes into something that matters to you. There's always a chance you could fail or lose that thing of importance. And if you did, there would be a cost. You would pay a cost in some way. You would hurt in some way. We also know in today's time that anytime we engage in something that matters, we're aware that people are watching us and forming opinions about us in our engagement. If you dare to care, you can't avoid these three things. And when these three things get activated, this is what the result is. It's a type of pressure that we feel. It's not danger fear, but it's the kind of fear we experience mentally when we're aware of two concurrent things. I care and uncertainty about what I care about. And if you were to naturally respond to that kind of pressure, we tend to go in one of two ways. We tend to either over control and master, or we avoid and escape until it has to be done. We learn that perfectionism and procrastination are the neurologically natural ways we cope with values-based fear. Can we find a middle ground? Yes, we can, but this is how we kind of naturally gravitate toward. Because if I can control it all and do it perfectly, I don't have to worry about failing. Or if I can sidestep this pressure until it has to be done, then it doesn't matter if I'm afraid when it has to be done. This is called the fear-based model of excellence, because you actually attain excellence doing this. You kick yourself into a different gear of motivation, a different gear of focus. That's why a lot of people say, I wait till the last minute because I work better under pressure. You actually don't. But what you're feeling is that different gear of motivation, that different gear of focus. But you can actually attain excellence doing this up to a point. It becomes something that starts to get in the way. The fear-based model of excellence eventually hits a ceiling effect and an increasing cost. I just can't perfectly control things the way I used to be able to, or I just can't pull it off in the last minute the way I used to without some kind of sacrifice of the quality of my effectiveness. And so when this starts to go awry, and it's usually undergraduate or graduate school, when this starts to happen, where we start to see this model unraveling at some level. So it helped us understand then what this curve looked like, because when we're over-attending through control and avoidance, a value has started to drift into a need state. And whenever a value drifts into a need, it's out of perspective. I no longer value belonging, I need to belong. I don't value achievement, I need to achieve. And that puts us into a psychological place of press. And we know that when we are pressing too hard psychologically, it gets in our way. Nothing bad happens, but it gets in the way of our effectiveness. And it certainly gets in the way of our resilience. It creates an intensity that eventually starts to be straining instead of only stressful. But then we also know when you underattend to values by avoidance and escape, we're calling something a value, but we're actually treating it like a want. A preference and a want is something that we may find important, but there's not the psychological commitment behind it. So then we just stay in a place of hope. Hope is a beautiful thing, but not as a motivational strategy. So I didn't study for this test. I hope it's easy. I feel very uncomfortable around people, so I'm going to stay in my dorm and hope that people come to me. This is what causes it to get in the way. And we found the sweet spot is in that middle ground of really treating values like values and managing them well. And so we learned that why the fear-based model of excellence gets in the way is whenever we start leading with fear, we move into a need state. And when we need something, what we're needing is reassurance that everything's going to be okay. We'll look for that reassurance by becoming very focused on outcomes, very dependent on outcomes. And we then keep score and develop this chronically evaluative mindset of how did it go today? How did it go today compared to yesterday, compared to you, compared to me? And this is what causes the plateau effect. So we became fascinated with wanting to understand, what do people do that disrupt this pattern, that disrupt this plateau effect? And then can you train it? When we studied consistent flourishers, we learned from very diverse backgrounds and from very diverse industries and areas of academia. We learned that there are no natural born flourishers. People that flourish work at it. They're very mindful about it. Well, what is that work? And so we were able to tease apart and distill what flourishing training looks like. This is what it's not. This is what it is not about. It's not about a comparative, competitive place of, I'm going to flourish better than anybody else. I'm win because I flourish better than Heather, or Heather flourishes better than me, so I've got to catch up. No, it's more about these things. The Authentic Excellence Initiative takes individuals through a training program that's designed to deepen and cause paradigm shifts of rethinking values, of rethinking integrity, of rethinking what resilience and what managing fear and what coping looks like, and actually what rethinking about what excellence looks like, where they actually train for flow. We take them through 5 paradigm shifts that get at these 4 areas. The managing fear differently and coping effectively are 2 separate paradigm shifts. So we end up with 5 paradigm shifts. So this is what I'd like to ask you. 1, we can spend the rest of the evening going through those 5 paradigm shifts and what we take students through in a broad sweeping way. And it's going to be fast. I'm going to hit and move through them. Or we can take one of these and do a deeper dive and spend more time with them. For instance, how do you manage fear differently? And we can spend most of our time on that. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask through, Heather, if it's possible to bring up through the chat or bring up through every other areas. I'll stop sharing the screen. Could you give me some feedback and just let me know, would you prefer all 5 paradigm shifts in a quick, breathless kind of pace, or would you prefer one in a deeper level? Give me some feedback, and thank you. You're all doing a great job of giving me feedback. Okay. And I'm going to take it based on sheer number. What do we have? What do we have most? Okay, Heather, what do you think? Give me some thoughts. What do you think the consensus is?
It looks like we have a bit more for a broad overview.
Okay. So we'll do a broad overview, and know that if at any point in time we may want to do a follow-up at some point in time and just go in more deeply, happy to have those conversations with you. And I'm going to leave you with my phone number. I'm in the book. You'll also be able to give me a call if you ever want to talk about these things in more depth. I'm happy to support you in any way that I can. So we're going to go with a broad sweep. I'm going to hit and move. And let me share my screen again. See if that comes up. Heather, can you see that okay? Is that coming up all right?
I can see it.
Thank you. So we're going to start with these 5 paradigm shifts, and this is how I want you to think about them. I want you to think about them as paradigm shifts. It's rethinking something and being intentional about that until it gets internalized. This comes from the Life Values Inventory. The first paradigm shift is centered around values and kind of thinking differently about values. This comes from an open educational resource, and it's based on our empirical research. So it's an open educational resource to everyone. It's a .org. So you're welcome to go to that website and spend time with it. It's not just for William Mary students, it's for the general public. So I encourage you to go there and be able to look through that. And on that online open educational resource, there are video series that go into more depth around these paradigm shifts. So that may be one way that you can go into depth with one of those if you'd like. You're welcome to review those at any time. But when we take students through an assessment of their values, but it's for a different reason. And these are the 14 values that we started with empirically. We started with over 200 values, spent 10 years doing an empirical assessment of which ones were the most stable across cultures and across generations. And these were the 14 that were the most stable. Does this mean that these are the only values that exist? Of course not. But it's a good start, especially from an empirical standpoint. But here's what we take them through. we take them through this following paradigm shift, and we spend quite a bit of time with this. And when I talk about the paradigm shifts of moving beyond our neurology, what I mean by that is we have a natural tendency in our world to live in our neurology. And what that means is we're wired for crisis and regulation. And in that crisis and regulation, we can just drift into a pattern of living according to have-tos and comfort. So we just, every day is about the urgent have-tos of the day, and then we seek comfort. We are a purposeful relational species, though. And so we must move beyond our neurology to a deeper level of purpose and how our purpose interacts with other people's purpose in order to flourish. One of the paradigm shifts that does that is to move from values clarification to values relationship. And what that actually means is that we move from what my values are to what is my relationship with my values, which means how are my values alive in my life? We learn from consistent flourishers that every year and before any big transition, they will go away by themselves and reflect on what matters to me right now and how well is that reflected in my behavior. We learned if you just only focus on what your values are, fear and comfort, which are the most natural motivators, will rule out every time. Fear and comfort are our most natural motivators, but the deepest form of human motivation are our values, but only if we have a healthy relationship with them. And so this process, we take them through and move them through this process of understanding their current relationship with their values. So we take their life values inventory and we ask them, let me move that back a second, excuse me. We go through this series of questions where we ask them, so look at your high priority values, which are values that were important to you and you frequently act on them. And we ask them questions such as, what were the influences that shaped the development of these values? How did these values get to be high priority? What's great about these values and what's stressful about these values? What fears are attached to these values? We ask them, what values do you turn to during times of distress that they use as an anchor? What values changed the most for you over the past 12 months? And what value do you hope to most affect over the next 12 months? Which values are more fulfilling to you right now? And which ones are more stressful? We move them to the over-attention values, where with over-attention, where we're giving more attention to values than we would prefer. The reason for that is worry is leading. And what's the nature of that worry? And how do we manage that worry in a different way? But getting them to understand that relationship with their values. And with their under-attention values, these are the values we feel often guilty and saddened about because we're not giving the attention that we think we should to these values. Well, is it because we're developing a perfectionistic script with this value, that we're holding ourselves to a perfectionistic standard? Or is it just really true that we really are devoting less attention than we would prefer? And we get them to kind of look at that in terms of how do we find room in a healthy way around these values? And then we talk about their low priority values. And is there a time, do they have a relationship where their low is someone else's high? And how do they navigate that difference? And are there any low priority values that they have to be kind of careful about in terms of how they express them because they fear being judged by others? Ask them questions such as, what values feel affirmed at William and Mary? And what values feel marginalized? And what do you do with those values that are marginalized? Where do you get them expressed? Or do they get dormant? They go dormant. This is all around spending a lot of time getting them to develop a relationship with their values, because it moves them into a place of a deeper level of motivation that overrides fear and fatigue. It moves them to that deeper level of effectiveness by focusing on their relationship. One of the coolest things that happened last year in the absurdity of the pandemic is we had students that had gone through this course, and what they did is when they went back home with their families, they all took the LVI together and had a conversation around these values and their relationship with their values. And they said it was just a lovely conversation, that their parents started to get to know them as adults through the lens of their values. And they got to know their parents and their humanity through the lens of their values and their fears. It was just a really deep, lovely conversation. But we don't stop there. We have to take it to another paradigm shift of moving from what my relationship is with my values, but also noticing that, the healthiest relationships have healthy boundaries. So we take them through this exercise that is about them clarifying what do these values look like healthy? And what do they look like unhealthy? We actually call them blueprinting. We take them through a blueprinting exercise where they write all their values from their LVI results on the left-hand side. And then for each value, they write, what does this value look like in action when it's healthy? And what does this value look like in action when it's unhealthy? And where would you put this value on the continuum right now of your relationship with them? This is really powerful because this starts to move them into the next paradigm shift, which is moving them from experience-minded to integrity-minded. Cornerstone of adult self-esteem is actually predicated on integrity, how well my values line up with my behavior. They never perfectly align. But one of the things that we do is we tend to think of values in terms of how we experience them, what the outcome is happening from our values. So with belonging, how connected do I feel? With achievement, how well am I achieving? And that's fine. But we find to flourish, we need to give more power to the expression of our values than the experience that we get from that. Both matter. Both matter. But expression and engagement has to matter more in order for us to flourish. And the experience is just icing on the cake. And so being able to do that, we have to move them into this place of understanding, well, what does expression of my values look like? What do my values in action look like? And what do they look like healthy and what do they look like unhealthy? The reason why that's so important is for advanced mindfulness. Because what we find is life, our world will drift us into an unhealthy expression of our values. And if I don't know what that looks like, I'll go far down that continuum until I start to feel the symptoms of that. And if I don't know what healthy looks like, I don't know how to get back. But if I know what healthy and unhealthy look like, and I've crystallized that, then I catch it sooner when I drift. And if I know what healthy looks like, I know immediately how to get back to it. And that's the point of moving into more integrity minded. And here's what we found. When they start doing this work, this is what they start to realize. When they map this out, they start to see patterns. They start to see patterns that when this drifts into an unhealthy expression, their focus is more on control. It's more on outcomes. It's more about comparison to others. It's more about seeking comfort through habit. It's really need driven. It's fear-based need driven. And what they're pursuing are outcomes and the experiences. Outcomes are wonderful things, but not when they are in need. And when it's healthy expression, the focus is more on being engaged in the purpose of it, the process of it. And there's this realistic estimation of time and energy. It's the pursuit of integrity. We call it courage driven because this is hard. It's hard work. But courage is defined by hard, right work. Whenever we step into something that's right for us, and it happens to be hard, that requires courage. We all have that capacity. And so we talk about doing courage-driven work by defining my worth by the engagement in a healthy expression of my values. So the first two paradigm shifts is moving from what my values are to what is my relationship with my values, and then shifting into what is my healthy relationship with values, and how do I start to define myself where my worth is defined by the engagement of my values, and the mood is just the outcomes of the day. So the worth are the values, the outcomes are just the mood of the day that helps us be able to keep things in perspective. And then we move to this notion of, so relationship with my values is important, but we also learn that there's this dynamic relationship between values and fear. You can't have one without the other. I can't care about anything without being reminded of the uncertainty of it, which causes me to be afraid. And I can't be afraid of anything that I don't care about. So we know that they go hand in hand. The question is, how do you manage fear in a healthy way? And we learn that people that flourish are no less afraid. They just hold fear well. They hold fear in its sweet spot, and they focus less on fear reduction through either control or avoidance. They focus less on fear reduction and focus most on holding fear well. Well, what does that look like? How do we put fear in its sweet spot? So what they recognize is Fear and values are going to be in this dynamic relationship. And at the end of the day, if we lead more with fear, we tend to plateau. And if we lead more with our values, we tend to flourish. But the world will pull fear forward every day. We have to mindfully bring values into the foreground and hold fear well. So what does that look like? Well, we take students through 6 strategies of managing fear differently than control and avoidance. They already got that one down. They've got those patterns down. What can they do differently? So here are the 6 strategies of managing fear differently. Again, this is not about guaranteeing excellence. It's about holding fear well so that we can then be more effective, to where we recognize that wellness is essential to excellence by how we flourish. First strategy is they move from seeing fear as an emotion of threat to an emotion of importance. Being able to see fear as an emotion that's actually confirmation that I'm engaged in something that matters. We work with Olympic athletes and take them from an intolerance of fear to an acceptance of fear to an embracing of fear, where it becomes an important part of their training. It takes about a month to get them into that mindset. And it's really about shifting instead of seeing this uncomfortable emotion, because fear is an uncomfortable emotion physically. And they shift from seeing this as the what if, which is an emotion of threat, to seeing this as this is my body telling me that I'm engaged in something that matters to me. And how great is that? How wonderful is that? Joaquin Phoenix, a great actor, always talks about how he goes into his performances with a strong sense of doubt. And when they talk about why, he doesn't intentionally. And when they talk about why, he said, because going into something where you're putting things on the line without doubt is just being arrogant. Tony Romo is a great quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. And he's a great golfer. And when he retired, they gave him some exemptions on the PGA Tour. And when they asked him before he competed, they asked, are you more nervous doing this than playing football? And he said, yes, that's the point. That's the reason I do it. It's about embracing this fear as an emotion that confirms importance, that it clarifies, this tells me I'm engaged in something that matters to me. And how great is that? In fact, people that flourish often get worried when they're not afraid, because they worry about, well, how important is this to me? And then they move from this sense of failure and they rethink what failure is. We typically think of failure as this very personal statement. What does this say about me that I got this grade on this test that might determine the next 50 years of my life? We get very personal in terms of, what does this say about me? What does this say about the world around me? What does this say about my future? And instead, they shift to seeing it as more worthy disappointment. That is a deeper truth of what failure experiences are. It's truly not failure. Whenever we have a disappointing outcome, it really truly is just that. No one data point has the power to completely determine our future unless we give it that power. And so what people that consistently flourish do is they honor the disappointment. They honor the sting. They honor the pain of saying, I worked hard for this and didn't get it. This hurts. This sucks. And they honor that. But they see it as disappointment and don't go one step past that. And the reason for that is we need no advanced coping strategies to cope with disappointment. And it's not a mind trick. It's not trying to trick your mind, because it's more deeply true. But our body will respond to truth. And when we remind ourselves of this truth, is that this is disappointing and it's only disappointing. We need no advanced coping strategies. But to cope with failure, none of us feel capable of coping with failure. We're all overwhelmed by that, and it brings fear to the foreground. So what you see in white, that sentence brings fear to the foreground, and in gold, it puts fear in its sweet spot. And then they rethink hurt. Hurt is a difficult emotion. And at times we can feel it as awful. In fact, our society kind of awfulizes hurt. That's not a word, but you know what I mean. We really try to stay away from hurt. And whenever something is classified as awful, our brain becomes preoccupied with avoiding it. So if to hurt is awful, then we become very protective. very protective of staying away from it, which causes fear to come to the foreground because we're constantly vigilant about avoiding hurt. Instead, when we consistently flourish, we see hurt as a hard emotion and only hard. When we can look at the truth and see that when I'm hurting, it's because I've become aware that my life has become harder. I made a bad grade on this test. Now I'm going to have to work harder for the rest of the semester. I just broke up, and now I've got to grieve, and then I've got to trust again, and then I've got to step into a relationship. My life just got harder. Or in aspects of marginalization or oppression that I may daily experience, my life is hurtful, which is making it harder. But if we can see it as only hard, what that does is it honors the hard, that it reminds us that it's not beyond us, that hurt is not beyond us, and that we can manage this. And it keeps fear in its proper perspective. I've been going through a deep state of bereavement for the past few recent years, where I've lost my mother and my father and my son and my brother. I'm the last one in my family, and I'm deeply grieving. And it's hard and it's hurtful, but I want it to be hard. It's a good hard. It's a good hard. It's an honorable hard. It's a hard that honors the love of how much I miss them. And it's about seeing it as only hard. What I love about in our culture right now with students, oftentimes when I'll see them and we talk about hard, they'll immediately go, and it's only hard. And it's just this wonderful transformation that they're going through to realize this is not beyond me. I can manage this. I can cope with this. And we teach them coping strategies to be able to do that. Then the next one is teaching them the difference between two kinds of confidence. Most individuals rely on experiential confidence. And experiential confidence is when I go in to perform, if it goes well, I just ride that wave. Or the more experience I have with something, the more confident I feel, which is fine. That's good. Most human beings rely on that. But when we flourish, we rely on what's called volitional confidence. And that's confidence by choice. And volitional confidence basically means when feeling can't, what of this can I do? Not what else can I do, but what of this can I do? It's finding this level of confidence by choice when I feel myself backpedaling in avoidance because I'm feeling overwhelmed or ambivalent or uncomfortable. How can I step back into this with what can I do? Taking a small part of it. The thought of doing 2 hours of this project tonight, I find myself backpedaling. Well, what of this can I do? Well, maybe I can do a brain dump for 10 minutes. And they step into that. The important thing is every time we step into can, when feeling can't or when feeling don't wanna, it neurologically changes how we process fear. And it starts to move us into fear management that's much more effective. How many times have you heard the importance of these concepts? Find your passion and strive for happiness and just try to reach your potential. And all along the way, try to find work-life balance. Be balanced along the way. These are all virtues that we've heard so much about in our society, and not one of them predicts flourishing. In fact, it gets in the way because it brings fear to the foreground. Instead, when we more consistently flourish, we move, instead of striving for passion, we strive for purpose. And instead of striving for happiness, we strive for meaning. And instead of striving for our potential, we strive for the expression of our values. And instead of striving for balance, we strive for harmony, which basically means instead of trying to find balance among all of our important things where it's all equal, we think in harmony. Today, what's the most right devotion of my time and energy? And it might be 90% this, 5% that, and 5% that. But I ask that question every day as if I've never asked it before, and I allow that answer to be different. And that is what harmony is. And when we experience work-life harmony, we actually experience more balance. So it's interesting, it's paradoxical that the more we strive for the second sentence, the more we experience the first. When we strive for meaning, we do find we have more moments of happiness. When we strive for purpose, there are times when we feel the passion. We just can't do it for that reason, because it gets in the way, because fear comes to the foreground, Because what happens if I'm not feeling the passion this week? Oh my God, what does that mean? Did I choose the wrong thing? And what happens if I'm not happy? Then I need to chase happiness and I need to find happy. And if I am happy, how do I hold happy? And if I'm not happy, how do I find happy? When happiness is essentially just an emotional state that can be affected by 100 variables, including how much water you currently have in your body. All of these things move us to this deeper level. And then it's about, how do we think about outcomes? Outcomes are wonderful things. They're essential things. They're necessary things. Outcomes can serve as feedback for our work. Outcomes can serve as motivation for things we don't really like to do, but if I focus on an outcome, it might motivate me. And outcomes can serve as a great reward for our hard work. Outcomes are good, but only if we want them. Whenever an outcome moves from a want, whenever an outcome is a want to, works for us. The second that it moves from a want to a have to, gets in the way of our best performance by 25 to 50%. Automatic ceiling effect. Because if I have to have an outcome, that means I cannot fail. And if I cannot fail, my fear of failure skyrockets to the forefront and it gets in our way. Instead, we want to see outcomes as icing on the cake, life-enhancing want-tos. It basically looks like this, that I see myself as having all the necessary ingredients to make a good tasting cake, and my effort is the baking process. So we get engaged in the process of what we're doing. And the outcomes are icing on the cake. It does sweeten the flavor of the cake. It does enhance us and make us happier. It's a wonderful thing. But if I don't get that outcome, I still have a good tasting cake. But not when it's a need. Because when it's a need, it becomes an essential part of my identity. And then it becomes a necessary ingredient of even making the cake, which is overwhelming and causes fear to be too high. And it just simply gets in our way. Well, that's a good concept, but how do you actually do it? How do you keep outcomes in a want to level? And it's essentially making the transition from being noun focused to verb focused. And it's essentially focusing on 4 verbs. If you focus on these 4 verbs, it keeps outcomes in perspective. And so the 4 verbs of excellence are this acronym. Keep in mind this acronym. A stands for actions. But the 4 verbs are essentially learning. Enter every day with a mindset of learning. When you study, study to learn. When you stop learning, take a break. Come back and learn some more. Instead of studying for a grade, which will keep you planted in swim library for 4 hours at a time, and you're not learning and retaining hardly anything. Did you know after the first 45 minutes of sitting somewhere for the longest time and keep on studying, you're retaining about 17% of what you study? Instead, study to learn. When you stop learning, take a break, come learn some more. And then go tell them what you know. Express what you've learned. Every day, there should be a time where you are expressing your talent and learning and training to date. If I have a test, I'm going to go tell them what I know. If I have a paper, I'm going to tell them what I know. And it's staying verb focused in that expression. And then there's the verb of relating. This is a big difference this is the number one critical thing of social anxiety, of differentiating social anxiety from social confidence. If I think about relationship, the noun of relationship, I'm going to constantly be evaluating, how are we doing now? How are we doing? How am I contributing? Which causes us to be anxious. But if I focus more on relating, I can completely control that. How do I want to relate? Well, I may want to relate with respect, with curiosity, with kindness. That stays within me. It's about moving from being interesting to interested, from interesting to interested. And that stays within ourselves. And then the last verb is taking care of myself. These verbs are essentially every day, whenever we get pulled into the have to mode of outcomes, which we will, we all get pulled into needing a certain outcome. Whenever we do that, if we'll take a deep breath and move into the next right verb, one of these 4 verbs will be relevant. Every single time, one of these 4 verbs will be relevant. And we step into the next right verb. Did you know that expressing what I've learned was one of the biggest distinctions between the past 3 Olympiads of who medaled and who didn't? Of people that medaled, that weren't expected to, this is actually what they did. And people that didn't meddle that were expected to, it became the outcomes were a have to. They became so focused on outcomes being that this is a reflection of who I am, and that this moment will make all of my sacrifice and all those around me, their sacrifice, worth it. The moment became too big and it got in the way. And the ones that did great essentially said, let me go express my talent and training to date. And they performed great. So it's about stepping into that verb focus. Why is verb focus so powerful? 3 things. When we're more verb focused than noun focused, nouns are outcomes, grades, achievements, relationships. Those are nouns and those are outcomes. When we're more verb focused, we manage stress better because we're staying within ourselves. We're keeping the demands and capabilities kind of within that same equilibrium. Secondly, the more verb focused you are, the more nouns you collect. You actually collect more nouns. And third, and most importantly, the more verb focused you are, the more you experience joy when you experience those nouns. When you collect those nouns, you actually experience joy. Because when outcomes are a need, when outcomes are a have to, when you're noun focused and you actually collect those nouns, the first emotion you feel is not joy, it's relief. And then you immediately chase the next noun. When you're verb focused and collect those nouns, which you'll collect more nouns because you'll be more effective, you actually experience joy in that moment. The next paradigm shift 4, is about moving, how do we manage and cope with difficult emotions? And it's about moving from the avoidance of difficult emotions to confidence in managing difficult emotions. It's not about liking difficult emotions. It's not about enjoying them, but it's about developing a confidence in managing difficult emotions. I often tell students that the main difference between you and me, besides me being an old fart, is that I have more confidence. I've learned right now over the years that the next time I'm hurt, which I will be, there will be a time when I will hurt again. The next time I hurt, I'm just more confident that I will manage it in a healthy way. And therefore, I don't fear it. And so that's what we want to do, is help build this sense of confidence that when life is handing them hurtful moments, that they can manage heartbreak and flourish through heartbreak by managing difficult emotions. Well, it's fascinating. We found that people that consistently flourish, rather than becoming more advanced in their psychological strategies, having more advanced psychological strategies, they actually get more basic. They get very elemental, and they focus on 3 things. It's just these 3 things are unnatural. We won't naturally go there. So here they are. First, they honor the reaction but challenge any conclusion. Now, keep in mind, I'm talking about coping here. If you can go and fix a problem, by all means, go fix it. If I'm affected emotionally and I can resolve it or solve it, by all means, go do that first. This is about a time when you are affected by something that you can't necessarily change, and you're going to be affected for a while. How do you effectively cope? Well, the first thing you do is you honor the reaction but challenge any conclusions. We tend to do just the opposite. We tend to want to get away from this reaction, get away from this hurt, and we tend to get very conclusive about ourselves, our future, and the world around us. See, you can't trust anybody. See, my future is just shot. See, our world is no different. In fact, we're going backwards. We make conclusions in the midst of that myopic vision of emotional hurt. Instead, people that flourish, they honor the reaction. They say, I'm hurt because something hurtful happened. I'm depressed because something depressing happened. That's not clinical depression. That's healthy. I'm depressed because something depressing happened. I'm upset because something upsetting happened. And then they do the work of challenging those conclusions, because they will get conclusive. And what they do is they catch it, they take a deep breath, and they say, stop. This is normal for me to think, but it's not helpful. And then they step into the next thing, which is they focus on healthy self-care. But they do it for the health of it, not in order to feel better. There's a difference between self-care and soothing. Self-care is intending to be healthy. Soothing is intending to feel better. They may look the same, but the intention matters. The intention makes all the difference in the world. If my focus is on soothing, then my focus is to feel better. Now, there's nothing wrong with soothing per se. There's nothing wrong with having some enjoyable activities throughout your day that just make me feel good. There's nothing wrong with having that. I'm talking, though, that when you're in a place of pain, in a place of being affected, and you move into soothing, and the desire is to feel better, what you're essentially trying to do is get your brain chemistry to change. You're trying to move from feeling bad to feeling better. Well, there's only 5 things that change brain chemistry really quickly. That's food, drugs, sex, pain, and compelling entertainment. That's it. And there's nothing wrong with those 5 things, even the pain of exercise. But here's the problem. When we're trying to soothe and to feel better, we don't moderate those things well. We don't manage those things well, and they can get away from us. Or we actually give up on them, because I normally take care of myself by taking a run or doing art, but it didn't make me feel better when it used to. So I'm just going to stop doing it. So we either just abandon them, or they get away from us. Instead, if you focus on self-care, you're focusing on being healthy. And being healthy is something that moves us and heals us through coping. Now, sometimes when we focus on healthy self-care, we also happen to feel better. And that's just a bonus, but it can't be the reason that you do it. You do it for the health of it. We found that people that flourish do another step, and that is they do something of personal rightness. In other words, they step into a value. They step into something that matters. Every day they ask themselves, what matters to me today? And even though I'm impaired and affected and really affected by this, I can always step into something of meaning and purpose, even if not feeling it. I know what matters to me. I know my purpose, and they step into that value even while affected. The reason for that is what that does is that reminds people that I can be affected by something but not be defined by it. And that's what makes all the difference in the world in terms of coping. So let me go back to step 2 and look at self-care. What do we mean by healthy self-care? Well, here are some examples that we teach students. We talk to them about these different types of healthy self-care. Verbal expression, converting emotional energy to going and talking with someone that feels safe and trustworthy. We know that that's healthy. Physical expression, converting emotional energy to physical expression, from something that can be very vigorous to something serene, like deep breathing. Creative expression, converting emotional energy to creative expression. And you don't even have to be talented at it. It can just be a form of healthy self-care. Meditative expression, such as mindfulness, meditation, prayer, whatever is consistent with your values. But this is more of a meditative kind of form of managing my emotions and taking care of myself. And then sometimes taking a break is a healthy form of self-care. That's when you just put it on the shelf and say, I need a break from this for a while. That's when you go out with your friends, but you don't talk about it. Or that's when you distract yourself by pouring yourself into your work or something like that. And that's fine to do in a temporary way. It shouldn't be your only form of self-care, but it's fine for it to be that every now and then. Also, asking ourselves when we're going through a difficult time, asking ourselves what else is true kind of stretches our vision. Because when I'm upset, I have myopic tunnel vision. So if I'm upset at Heather because she hurt me or made me angry, I can only see Heather through that lens of upset. But if I ask myself, what else is true about Heather? At first, I may not want to ask that because I want to be mad at Heather. But if I keep asking, what else is true about Heather? And what else is true about me? It allows me to expand that vision to where it allows me to see this in a more broad way and allows me to get to a point of perspective quicker. Appropriate inappropriateness, we also learned that people that consistently flourish have this little secret side to themselves where they do little irresponsible things or little things that are just, they don't hurt anybody, they don't hurt anybody else and don't hurt themselves. But there's this little inappropriate behavior at times that's just your way of protesting the absurdity of what you're managing. It's kind of like going to the top of the mountains and screaming, just like, I accept what's happening. I don't necessarily have to like it. And it's just a form of kind of symbolic protest. A little bit of profanity here and there, or a little bit of humor here and there, or just a little bit of irresponsibility to say, no, I'm not going to do that right now. And it doesn't get away from them, but it's just your way of kind of protesting the absurdity of what you're dealing with. Another form of healthy self-care is dreaming. You don't control that, but it's a healthy form of self-care of kind of processing important emotions that your mind is taking care of yourself with, because you're either too busy during the day or you're too close to it and don't want to get near it during your waking hours. So we take them through that kind of form of being able to cope and develop just a greater sense of confidence of managing difficult emotions. The last paradigm shift is basically, let me show you real quickly. There's 4 paradigm shifts that I talked about. It starts to change how they describe authenticity. And it's about basically us moving students from being emotion-centered and habit-focused to value-centered and healthy-focused. That's what we're talking about. Moving from this surface level of authenticity of I'm just going to be myself, which means I'm however I feel in the moment. So if I'm mad at you, I'm not going to act like I like you. It's kind of that notion of just being guided by your emotions. From emotion-centered and habit-focused to value-centered and healthy focus. And that's what those 4 paradigm shifts kind of lead people to. But we also learned that people that flourish actually train for flow. In the flow experience, what we learn is when you're in flow, when you're at this optimal level of performance, you're actually in an expressive mindset. And I won't spend much time with this, but I wanted to share with you quickly. Psychologically, these are the psychological factors that have to be a part of an expressive mindset. So the only way you can reach flow is if these 5 psychological dynamics are present. And so what we teach students is how to train for that. Here's what these 5 psychological dimensions look like in action. Is starting every day asking, what's the most right devotion of my time and energy today? And they crystallize it, and then they prioritize it. Of what matters today, what matters most. And by asking myself, what's the right devotion of my time and energy, that starts off with values-based intentionality. If there's any part of that that feels too much or overwhelming them, then we get them to keep narrowing down that until they get to a place of can, that volitional confidence of this, with what I've got to give today, what can I do? And then they visualize that. They imagine that. They see themselves doing that. Because if I don't visualize what I value, I'll visualize the what if. I'll visualize what I'm afraid of. And you'll just go about controlling and avoiding the rest of the day. Once I have in my mind what matters to me today, what does that look like in action with what I can give to that today, then you simply engage in the day, expressing your full talent and energy with full acceptance of whatever happens. At the end of the day, you take a moment and appreciate what you did and why, with no buts allowed. That brings a sense of appreciation and compassion, so that we can also move into analysis and reflection, which essentially looks like, what is one thing I can learn from today that'll help me for tomorrow? There's a difference between analysis and evaluation. Analysis is an honest intent to learn. Evaluation is very personal. Good, bad, success, failure. Those are the things that we teach them to do to practice the expressive mindset. Why does all this matter? These 5 paradigm shifts essentially disrupt this cycle of plateau by changing and transforming the meaning of 2 important constructs that disrupt the plateau effect. And that is essentially trust and compassion, but not how we normally define trust and compassion. Trust is often defined as, oh, I just have faith, everything will be okay. No, we talk about trust by going deeper. So where the deepest form of trust is, I trust that I know what matters to me. And I trust that I know what it looks like in action when it's healthy. And I trust that when it's hard and unfair and hurtful, I know how to manage this in a healthy way. That's the deepest form of trust. And when that level of trust is there, trust is the only thing that overrides fear. So fear gets disrupted in this cycle. And then compassion is this mindful intention for one thing. It's not, oh, I just love everybody. Oh, I just have positive regard for everybody. No, compassion is defined as a commitment act of curiosity. A commitment act of curiosity. Active curiosity is the skill that builds empathy, and empathy is the skill that builds compassion. Not just compassion for others, but self-compassion. In a loving way, I want to be able to say, our children, our young adults, they're pretty compassionate with others. They don't do a great job with self-compassion. They are hard on themselves. They say things to themselves they would never say to anybody else. So how do we build this mindset of wonder, of curiosity, to where even at the end of the day, I could sit there and say, today I totally led with fear. I just controlled and avoided my way all day. Instead of ending with idiots, you end with, what about today made me vulnerable of doing that? And what can I learn about this that'll help me for tomorrow? And when we find this deeper level of trust and compassion, we move into this expressive mindset. This is one, as I want to close up tonight, this is one of my favorite portraits, favorite artist renderings. It's by René Magritte. He was a 1930s Belgian artist. This is called Clairvoyance. And the point of this is being able to acknowledge that every year we have evolving uncertainties in our life that we are focusing on, just like this egg that we don't know how it's going to turn out. But they are what we focus on. They have our attention. And the only way that I can look at that and envision this image is through a lens of trust and compassion. Because imagine what that picture would look like if we're looking at that image through a lens of fear and judgment. It would look very different. And then I want to make sure that you know, and we're going to share these PowerPoint slides with you and have this available for you. But I also want you to know of my availability to follow up with this and to talk further about this if you have any questions. So I know we're at the end of our time, but I wanted to bring it back and see if anybody had any questions. And Heather, I want to invite you to impart your wisdom. If there's anything here that you think that you've noticed this past year in working with your families and parents that you've developed a relationship, if there's anything that you want to kind of message the group to think about too, I'd love for your input.
Thank you, Kelly. I think that's a great question. And I think, today we sent all families this lovely email full of resources that students can use or that they can use when they're having conversations with their student. And, I think one of the big things that I've picked up from this last year is our families have this really strong innate desire to see their students happy and thriving and successful at William and Mary. Yeah. And so I think this conversation is really appropriately timed, and that there are a variety of different ways that students will experience William and Mary, and it's probably not going to look the same for all, and it's probably not always going to be full of those really high highs. There are going to be some low lows. And there is some real learning and some real life experiences that come from those low lows that they need to experience while they're here and have the environment to do so. And I think sometimes, that can just be challenging to listen to on the other end of the phone, right? When they call and they're in the middle of those experiences. And so I think this is a really well-timed conversation, and it helps our families think through maybe how can I better support them? How can I have conversations with them about this? Can I take any nuggets of wisdom to use in our next conversation? So I think that would be my insight.
I love that, Heather. I think that's wonderful, because we as parents, we have the same fear-based model of excellence too. And so when we hear our children suffering or in sorrow, we get afraid. We get afraid that they're drifting away from their happiness and from their wellness. And so we tend to kind of control with that. We tend to step in and try to save that and control, when actually in that moment we want to join them in it and be able to say, this does sound hard. How can I be of most support to you right now? And allow them to coach you as to what that looks like, but to also give them the message that you have trust in them, that they can get through this, that it is hard and it is bumpy and it may not be linear, but you have faith in them that they can work through this and that you're there to support them. That builds that innate sense of trust, and also them feeling like they can work with you as fellow adults with that. So I love that advice. I think that's very wise. Thank you for that.
For sure. I don't see any other questions coming through. So Kelly, if you want to close us out, I thank you for being with us this evening. This session was recorded. It'll be uploaded to our website, but any last words of wisdom before we go?
I would just love for people to be able to go onto the open educational resource and explore that and see if there's anything that resonates for them in terms of their role of supporting both. This is an important transition for you. So be able to see what of these strategies might be relevant for me as a parent and what might be relevant to how you can support your student. But as you go and explore that open educational resource, please feel free to reach out and ask any questions that you may have. I'd love to get to know you and learn how we can support you as well through this. So thank you for this opportunity to spend time with all of you this evening. Heather, I appreciate the invitation.
Wonderful. Thank you all. And thank you to all our families for joining us. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks. Bye. Take care.